Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's WCMA member webinar. Today we are focusing on solutions to prevent slips, trips, and falls. I'm Grace Atherton. I'm WCMA's Communications Director, and I just want to go through a couple of quick housekeeping notes before I turn things over to Rebecca Sweeney, our Senior Director of Programs and Policy, to get us started. First, please make sure you're muted when you're not speaking on the call today. We want to make sure we can avoid any interruptions and any background sound. So make sure you're muted. Feel free to drop any questions you may have in the chat throughout the presentation. Our presenters will reserve some time at the end for Q&A, as you can see in our agenda here. So we will keep an eye on that chat box and make sure that we get any questions you may have answered. Feel free to put them right in there as you think of them. Otherwise, you'll also be invited to unmute toward the end of the session. And if you think of any questions at that time, you're welcome to share them as well. We will share a link to a recording of this webinar along with a list of resources and contact information by the end of this week. So if you miss anything or you need contact information for any of our presenters, please know you will get that email from me later in the week with all of that information. With that, I will turn things over to WCMA's Senior Director of Programs and Policy, Rebecca Sweeney, to start us off.
Thanks so much, Grace, and thanks to everybody who took the time to join us today, and to those of you who will be watching a recording of this later. I'm delighted that we have a great lineup of trusted industry suppliers to share their insights and expertise with you, in addition to some innovative products that can help solve a significant issue in dairy processing plants, and that is slips, trips, and falls. As you can see on the agenda before us, we have Tony Lee from Key Resin and Flow Resin, Courtney Boeger from Nelson-Jameson, and Jim Miller from Saldesia. And they'll be focusing predominantly on flooring, booties, and boot coverings today. We know that slips, trips, and falls also includes things like lifts and ladders, but we're going to focus on what we consider to be the top priority for our members, and a much desired topic for this webinar, which is focusing on that footwear and the flooring surfaces that can cause trouble. So let's begin for a moment. I think that from childhood, we consider slipping and tripping kind of funny, right? Hence all of the cartoons that focus on this. But the reality of the situation is that slips, trips, and falls can be very, very serious in our processing facilities. In fact, it's the second most frequent workplace injury. And while a tiny slip or trip doesn't necessarily mean a trip to the emergency room, we know that almost a third of those incidents do result in a moderate or severe injury where medical professionals need to be called into play. And that can be very expensive for an employer when it happens within the workplace. Obviously, it's also of grave concern because our people are our most valuable resource. It's hard to find good help, and when you do, it's imperative that you keep them safe on the job so that they can continue to do that work for hopefully their entire career. It's sadly also the leading cause of workplace deaths. And we see in the United States, 700 people die in their workplaces every year because of these, in large cases, falls trigger those very significant instances. Let's talk about some of the impact beyond the prevalence of slips, trips, and falls. We know that this is, in addition to being the second most frequent workplace injury, it is the leading cause of workers' compensation claims. And it's no small amount. The average amount per instance is $20,000 cost to an employer. In addition to that, you see significant lost productivity. With a slip, trip, or fall, the average tends to be a week or two out of work, but 30% of same level falls, so we're not talking about falling from a second floor to a first floor, result in more than 3 weeks of lost work days. So it's a very significant impact on your business. The total cost to US employers on an annual basis is $70 billion. So that is why we're talking about this today. It's a significant concern. It's a prevalent issue, and the impact that it can have on your business is significant. It's also important that we're talking about this topic today because the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration has a regional emphasis program that focuses specifically on food processors right now. So if you happen to be operating in Region 5, and that's everybody in Wisconsin, so everybody on the call in Wisconsin should be listening to this carefully, but it also impacts those in Ohio, Illinois, and we know that there's a chance that that regional emphasis program also becomes a national emphasis program. So knowing that OSHA is more heavily scrutinizing food processors, now is a great time for you to be evaluating or reevaluating what you are doing related to all of your employee safety practices, and particularly as it relates to slips, trips, and falls, which we have seen become very much a focus within the region. So let's take a look at the enforcement stats for this regional emphasis program. It's been in place since 2022, summer of 2022. And at that time, the focus was really only on Wisconsin. It was a local emphasis program. So for the first 6 months, 9 months of this program, all of the numbers come out of Wisconsin. But we'll get to Wisconsin in a moment. When you take a look at the region overall, OSHA's already completed 178 inspections of food manufacturing businesses, which resulted in more than 500 violations and more than $5 million in penalties. So this isn't associated with a specific injury. It's just what they saw on site and decided to fine, issue penalties related. Here in Wisconsin, we can drill down just a little bit closer. And we know that since the start of this regional emphasis program, there have been 22 food manufacturers inspected, 89 violations, and about $700,000 in penalties. So again, $700,000 in penalties, or maybe you make a small upgrade now to try to avoid a penalty down the line, and even more importantly, avoid an injury or horrifically a fatality. So very important topic, and I'm thrilled that we have a great lineup of speakers, people that we know well, that work with many of you already, who can share some of their insights and expertise on this topic. We're going to start with Tony Lee from Key Resin. Tony has many years of experience working in the field with food manufacturers. And he also happens to be, I think, a starter member of our health and safety group. He attends all of these meetings. He knows exactly what's on your mind as it relates to slips, trips, and falls. And this is a great topic for him because this is what he does. He installs flooring for the purpose of safety and food safety in food manufacturing plants. Tony's going to give us a little bit more of his background as he begins his presentation. Tony, you'll want to just unmute yourself, and I want to thank you so very much for joining us today to share your insights.
Hey, well, thanks, Rebecca, for the opportunity here to talk to all these professionals. Yeah, I've been doing this for about 38 years, and I come from a different view than most, quote, salespeople. I was a contractor in the Chicagoland region, which went all over the Midwest, but doing all sizes of floors, from airports to food plants, drug plants. So I've had a firsthand look at the problems in the industries, okay? And one of the key things is the fact, no matter what we talk about today, you can do everything right and you still may get caught. And I'll just give you a little brief example. I was doing about 250,000 feet at O'Hare and Terrazzo, and we were doing the work at night, but we couldn't get the power cords up above, so we had to put them on the floor. And so all the safety people at O'Hare and the general and I, we were all out there, and we came up with a little ramp area, and everybody signed off on it. And what ended up happening is about a week into it, I got a call, and everybody in the baggage claim had to walk through this little ramp area. And it was the only way we could get power to the source of the grinders. So what ended up happening is I got a call at about 11:30 at night, and a woman, an older woman, had fallen to her knees. She had tripped. Now, we had caution tape there and everything that was required of us. And it just, unfortunately, her son happened to be a lawyer. And so about 3-4 weeks later, we get a thing in the mail that we're going to get sued and this and that. Well, I ended up settling out of court for, I think, about 10 or 15 grand. And she wasn't hurt at all, but the cost of it, if would affected my insurance, my EMR rating, and all this kind of stuff. And we all deal with workman's comp and this kind of stuff. So this is important for you guys to look at. And I understand what you're going through, because you can do everything right and still have an issue. So you can flip down. Oh, okay. So the examples of slip hazards that you're in the food industry, you're dealing with a lot of cleanup, a lot of water, a lot of times, and a lot of grease, a tremendous amount of oil. It depends on what you're producing, cheese, butter in this industries. And in the food industry, it crosses all parameters from a standpoint of what's on your floor. We just picked up about 37,000 feet this morning at a mold plant that I know that there's going to be plastic granules probably on the floor there. So you have to take that into consideration. Sloped walkway services, ramps, things like that. Are they non-skid? Is there water on those? Concrete polishing is huge today, and you may have some in your plant, you may not. Most likely not in the plant, maybe in a lobby. But if you pour water on that, it becomes slick. People walk into your facility, and if they have leather soles on their feet, they might slip on the butter or the cheese or whatever is down on the floor. So there's a lot of slip hazards that come into play in your production environments, much less your offices. Your trip hazards, and I just gave you an example of having an uncovered, well, we had a covered wire and we still got hit by it, from that standpoint. But obstacles and clutter in the wall, I can't tell you how many plants I walk in, and there's designated walking areas, and there's skids in the middle of them. There's, all this type of clutter in them. You see it all the time. Offices, furniture drawers left open. I in this office here where I'm at right now, I can't tell you how many times I open my file cabinet on the left bottom drawer and I work to the right and I come back and I trip on it. I'm a guy, I don't close drawers, I guess. Also in your kitchen, you probably had the same example with your dishwasher door being down, and then all of a sudden somebody turns around and trips. There's rumpled carpets and curved edges of mats and things like that I think some of the people are going to talk about. Unmarked steps, transitions from one flooring system to the next flooring system. You may have concrete on one side, you may have tile on the other, you may have carpet. How's the threshold between those? Speed bump and curb drops. You have those in your facilities to slow if you have forklifts down. But some of the most common failures that I see in the food industry are these. There's thermal shock when you're hitting it with 200-degree live steam, 212 live steam, mechanical impact, chemical attack, heat exposure, and inferior products, which is huge in this business right now. If you flip down, thermal shock, when you look at the picture on the right and there's a kettle with 200-degree hot water hitting a floor. Well, that's thermal shock because you're in a facility that's even, and the colder it is, the worse it is. So if it's a 40-degree room and you're taking it to live steam or 200-degree hot water, the floor wants to shudder. And what happens is the picture on the left, that's an epoxy floor. The one on the right is the urethane cement, which is the only system that'll handle that kind of heat. And the epoxies will start to, because there's plasticizers in an epoxy floor, high heat will suck the plasticizer out and you will start to see this cracking. You may have this in some of your facilities right now. Wouldn't surprise me. Wrong product, wrong environment. It's huge. The next one is mechanical impact. You have nails with skids on the bottom or nails on the bottom of skids scratching the floor. You have tools dropping. And what causes this is, and then you have water coming back onto the floor and it starts to peel up underneath. And then you have pictures like you see right there on the left. Not too sanitary either for a food facility, which, bacteria is a huge problem in this industry with listeria and things like that. But there's antimicrobial systems that we offer that'll handle this. Next one, chemical attack. And a lot of people don't understand this, that if you have a cleaning solution, which you all have to clean your floors, and they have acids in there, and it may be a 5% phosphoric or a nitric acid. But if you take a 5% solution and you hit it with 200-degree heat, it doesn't dilute it, okay? It makes it more corrosive. It takes that 5% and may make it a 20% solution. You see the floor that's etched on the left, that's concrete, that's a trip hazard. All those, it's exposed. And talk about bacteria, you can go all day in there. Whoops, you can go down again. The heat exposure, we deal with a lot of bakeries and they're 350 degrees and they're sitting on a floor. That'll damage a floor too. So heat directly onto a floor can cause problems with your flooring system, depending on what it is. And then the biggest problem in the industry is inferior products. And this is what you see. Tile is a great product on the right, but it's the grout that holds the tile together that's the issue. It'll harbor bacteria. It's hard to clean. It doesn't take thermal shock very well. The tile will, but the grout will not. On the left, we described epoxy to you, what happens with the thermal shock to that. And it's basically, there's two reasons why floors fail in my industry and your industry with this. It's bad prep and wrong product for the wrong environment. Those are the two things that you have to take care of to prevent slip and falls in these areas, because over time, these become more degraded. And as you can see, it just gets worse and worse. Go ahead. So not only are we dealing with all the physical problems with the floors and all that, you're also dealing with the human factor, which is huge. It's fatigue. You got people working 2 jobs. You got people working 2 shifts. Problems can happen there. Being under the influence. Unfortunately, Wisconsin has some problems in there. There are counties that can't find people to work because they can't pass a drug test. So it's a big thing having people come to work, under the influence. Bulky PPE, we've talked about that in the past, whether it's getting caught in equipment or tripping over, that's an issue. Poor light, air and lighting quality is huge. And one of the major ones, and I've seen a lot of people do this, they've gone to vision testing for their employees. But not only just vision testing, but also being able to have things, if you want to flip it, you can see marking and having the adequate, if your employees are Hispanic, having them able to read the signs if you have issues. So your effective trip and fall measures, the prevention measures, you have the adequate lighting, you have handrails on a ramp maybe. Slip resistant surfaces are huge today. We're a little bit different than Europe. Europe installs a lot of smooth floors. We're huge, over there, and they install our smooth MF flooring because of the fact that they wear big rubber boots, which you're going to talk about proper footwear, in the next few speakers. So the thing is that you want to be able to clean your floors and maintain them, good housekeeping, keep the walkways free. these are all things that are not new to the people involved with this on a daily basis, the safety people. Go ahead, Flip. In my industry, which is your industry, it's always a tug of war between skid resistance and cleanability. I would choose, if I were you, skid resistance. Okay. In Europe, as I said, they do a lot of smooth floors, but they're not as litigious here or there as they are here in the United States from a standpoint of being sued for and workman's comp claims. So document your maintenance procedures, record maintenance performed on a daily basis. It's like your old OSHA forms. You just want to be up to date. The biggest problem is we're starting to see manufacturers, and I'm on the manufacturing side now, this coefficient of friction. And coefficient of the dynamic coefficient, you'll see some ratings on there. Then a lot of people are pulling it from the Tile Institute and saying, oh, you have to have a dynamic coefficient of friction of 0.42. Well, that's great. And it's done by the two testing methods below, which may or may not be as good as you think it is. But the thing is that there is no standard for their coefficient of friction, because if they do a testing on one of my floors and it comes out 0.42, that's great. But you have butter on the floor, or you have meat on the floor, or grease on the floor. Well, that coefficient of friction goes out the window. Okay, from that standpoint. So there is no standard in the industry for coefficient of friction, but people are pulling it from two areas, the Tile Institute and also the concrete polishing in ASTM 2047. So the thing that I would impart on most of you is do the maintenance. If you go down to the next slide, you will see the differences. And I sort of gave you this slide because you can see the different textures in the floors. The 0.42 would probably be the top two on the left. You have a smooth floor on the bottom on the right. You have all this in between. And there, as I said, there's always a tug of war between maintenance. They're too hard to clean, but you don't want them too slick because you don't want people falling. So footwear comes into play a lot in the decision-making process for these floors. So with that said, I'll be in, if you go to the next slide, I'll be in booth 1550 at Cheese Expo next week. Feel free to come on by and we can talk and you can touch and feel the samples involved today.
That's awesome, Tony. I'm so glad that we'll be able to touch and feel. But let me ask you an immediate question about this, right? As you were presenting, particularly on this slide here, and you said, you know, on the far left upper, this is about the safest sort of floor you can get because of the tread, or at least the one that I suppose the health and safety coordinator would say, well, that's the one I want. Whereas the maintenance guy might want the one that is
in the middle,
lower right?
Yeah.
So as you install lots of floors in food manufacturing facilities, particularly in dairy processing, where do you see most people landing today? If they're making the investment in a brand new flooring system, do you see them trending in one direction or the other, or is there not one prevailing thought in industry?
Well, it's probably the top three on the left. Okay, going from left to right.
Okay.
And you can get a little bit more cleanability by doing one more top coat on it. And these are things that need to be discussed when you talk to a flooring guy. And this is what when I explain to you from a standpoint of right product for the right environment, somebody has to ask the right questions. What kind of cleaning agents? Because there's different polymeric systems that go on top of these floors. A good example, I just did 45,000 feet at NLX Beverage, a new facility down in Illinois. And we just finished it about 2 weeks ago. And we had a vinyl ester top coat in the chemical storage area because they had nitric acid, which is really nasty stuff, but they wanted the texture in it. So we had to change the top coats to a vinyl ester technology, which would handle that if it splashed and spilled on the floor. Where in the production area, we went with an epoxy because it could do that, and in a urethane cement. We just finished another one at a meat facility, which is top left on the right. We just finished last week about 45,000 feet at a brand new meat facility. And these, you have to have somebody ask the right questions. What are the chemicals that you're going to be cleaning with? Because that's super important. You don't want to put a flooring system down that's not going to be able to handle the chemicals. How hot is the water you're cleaning with? All these things come into play. Foodstuffs, you'd be surprised. Enzymes in certain foods will eat through certain floors. Okay. White bread would eat through a straight epoxy floor, and it's just the enzyme in it. Okay. So these are factors that come into play in the food industry, and you have to ask the right questions or have the questions answered to you from a standpoint of what you're trying to achieve.
The right partner is always the right thing. I appreciate you giving a little extra insight, and we're going to save other questions for the chat. I know there is one right now, burning questions for Tony Lee. So Tony's going to stay with us, but we are going to continue our program from this point with our next presenter. So with that, it's a pleasure for me to also introduce Courtney Boeger. Courtney has been with Nelson-Jameson for 7 years now in product management, but I can tell you, as much as she has a passion for project management, the thing that I know she loves the most is actually when she goes to that grocery store and she sees some of her clients' cheeses on the shelves. I think that makes us all proud. It's a great part of this industry. Courtney is going to share some insights with us, particularly related to the proper footwear. So I want to thank you, Courtney, for sharing your insights with us today, and take it away.
Okay, let me get my stuff here.
It's the most stressful part of any webinar is sharing your screen. But I can tell
Oh
you
my
it looks
gosh,
great. Looks
it
great.
is. It is. Okay, perfect. All right, so my name is Courtney Boeger. I've been with Nelson-Jameson for a product manager for 6 years now. Along with other lines, I do manage the footwear and facility identification too. So to start everything off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about safety footwear in general, just to kind of get the basics for understanding everything. So this is a label that you would see on the side of a safety toe boot, basically. The ASTM F2413 is the safety toe standard for composite and steel toes. So then working our way through that label, the -18 actually means is the year that standard was last revised. The next line has an I and a C on it. This is for the toe impact and compression standards. And then there's also an M on that line, but it could be an M or an F, meaning for male or female, although most of the time we see boots would be sized to male. And then that bottom line, that EH, is electrical hazard, but can also be a metatarsal guard or puncture resistance. So those are just honestly basics. When you're looking at that boot, it meets those certain criterias. But then jumping into the slip resistance side of it, so the ASTM F3445 was established in July of 2021. This establishes the minimum coefficient of friction required to label a footwear as slip resistant. Nothing like this existed in the industry prior. So it actually, I mean, you'll see quite a few boots now that if you look for it, that have that SR rating on them, which means they are slip resistant. From what I've seen, newer styles that have come out since, July of 2021 do have that slip resistant rating on them. And a lot of older styles that were established before 2021, manufacturers are going back and getting that SR rating to put on them because it is such a huge thing in the industry right now. So talking a little bit of over the sock or just boots in general. the outsole is the most important part of the boot when talking about slip resistance. The more surface area the outsole has that makes contact with the floor is, going to give you that better slip resistance. However, the environment needs to be taken into consideration as well. So if you look at that first one, that chevron sole, that's a pretty universal sole. It's very popular in the food industry. It has lots of edges for enhanced slip resistance on wet contaminated surfaces, but it also does work on just water or like wet surfaces. And when I say contaminated, think of like debris, like chunks of food or cheese or something like that laying on the floor. That next sole there is that Chevron Plus sole. This is specific to Tingley, but this is kind of a beefed up version of the Chevron. So this basically maximizes the number of edges and surface contact for wet contaminated surfaces. So more debris on the floor, stuff like that. This sole is actually thicker too, so you get a longer life out of it. It holds that slip resistance a little bit longer. Just overall a little bit better than the Chevron. That blue sole in the middle is a cleated sole. This one is meant for flooring that's going to have a lot of debris on the floor. So it's got the very large openings. It's kind of got a very aggressive tread, and it's meant to cut through that debris on the floor and make contact with the floor. And then it's kind of got those channels that if debris is in there, it's going to push it out to the sides of the boot so that, when you step down, you're making contact with the floor. This type of sole is not going to be good on a water or just a liquid surface. So this is really truly meant for, like debris, heavy debris on the floor or something like that. That last one is the Safety Lock Neo Grip sole. Same thing, just two different names used in the industry, I guess. This is pretty much the exact opposite of the cleated sole. This one is meant specifically for liquids only on the floor. They're kind of modeled after like boat shoes, but it has the maximum surface contact. Like I said, it's not recommended for anything with debris because if those channels fill up with food, it pretty much turns into a skating rink. And then a common question that I get is, how long will my boots last? And this is a really hard question to answer because there's so many different variables at play. It really depends on how long are the boots being worn during the day. Are they being worn for the entire shift, or is it just for, a few hours here and there? The chemicals that they're going to be coming in contact with, if it's for a sanitation crew or the production, all that comes into play there. And then a big one is the type of flooring. Is it going to be, like, does it have some sort of grit on the floor? Is it more concrete? Are you walking on mezzanines? That's all going to play a factor into how long your boot's going to last. So to help answer that question, Tingley actually developed a tread wear indicator on some of their newer styles of boots. And it's that little, where you see the arrow pointing, that little line. That little line is actually set about halfway down on the tread pattern. And so when you're wearing the boot and you look at it, I don't know, say it's been 3 months and you look at the bottom of your boot and that line is starting to become more even with the rest of the tread, you have about 3 months left before you have to buy new boots. It's a good way to just kind of gauge where everything is at, get your slip, for slip resistance, you have 3 months, about 3 months left of good slip resistance to go. And then there's actually also a line on the heel of that outsole as well, just because the way people walk is different and you might wear your heel faster than you wear, by the ball of your foot. So it's just something, not all styles have this, but it's something that's Tingley specific that they do have for most of their boots. And then I want to talk just a little bit more about over the boot. So this would be thinking like shoe covers. There's a couple different options here, but starting with a good pair of slip resistant boots is honestly the best line of defense when trying to avoid slips, trips, falls. If there's heavy exposure to contaminants for extended periods of time, or a safety toe is required, you need puncture resistance, any of that stuff, a good boot is the best option. However, there's times when boots aren't enough, or a disposable option's needed. Think if there's visitors coming in, stuff like that. Shoe covers are good for that option. So we do have the Tingley boot savers. They're latex, they go over your boot, latex. They're really good in slip resistance. They work on wet and dry surfaces. They have available in 4 colors and 4 sizes, so you can get that color coding aspect, which is very popular in food. And then the middle one there is the polypropylene and polyethylene shoe covers. These are real, I mean, they're meant to be worn for short periods of time, for visitors, things like that. They don't always have the best slip resistance, but if it's a short term or a temporary situation, it might be an option that works. And then I threw on the Shubi shoe covers just because we've been seeing success with them lately. They are a one size fits most, disposable shoe cover, have some liquid resistance to them. But what people seem to like is that they come in a variety of colors. And I mean, we're talking everything from, yellow, orange, black, you name it. I think they're available in pink even. So just a variety of colors for them. But again, if you want good slip resistance, start looking at that boot. That's the first step I always tell people is, look at your footwear program. But I understand if you need to go, with a shoe cover option. And then, so jumping a little bit into facility identification on this side of it. So OSHA and ANSI style signs are okay to use in your facility. However, just because signs are posted does not mean that they can be seen necessarily. So that caution sign up there is kind of an example of what a OSHA ANSI style is like. With caution, it has that yellow background. It has the block letters, all caps. That's kind of the classic sign. Most stock signs meet this requirement. You can also do custom signs and things like that, but that is your classic sign. And then I have that chart on there as well. That chart, I think it's a good visual, just, depending how far away you're going to be from the sign, like how big does the sign need to be? So in favorable conditions, you need 25 feet of distance per inch of text height. In unfavorable conditions, about 12 and a half feet of distance per inch of text height. So from what I see, working with signs, the most common sizes would be a 7 by 10 inch sign and then a 10 by 14 inch sign. And again, just because, a sign is there doesn't mean that you can always see it, but it does. If an area has the potential for a slip risk, signs can be added, but again, just make sure that they can be seen. And that wraps up my presentation. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, reach out to me, I guess.
I'm sure they will, Courtney. And just so everybody knows, during your presentation, I think that lovely graphic that you showed us on that last slide, Courtney, triggered some questions. We will send out the deck. And as Grace said earlier, a recording of this presentation along with contact information for all of our presenters. Courtney, I want to thank you so much for sharing it. I want to keep this quote unquote boot camp going with our next presenter, who I shouldn't have stolen that phrase, but because he came up with it. Clever Jim Miller joins us from Saldesia, where he has worked for 4 years, but he has quite a few years of experience working in industry, partnering with safety professionals in dairy processing plants, so that they can find solutions to some of their challenges. Today, he will be focused as well on boots and proper footwear. Fun fact about Jim, I think one of the reasons he might have gotten into this industry is that he's a big fan of finding out how things are made. I don't know if anybody's a fan of that old show from the History Channel, how it's made. But Jim tells me that one of his favorite parts of his job is being able to go in to these plants and see how it's made for himself as he works with his food and beverage clients. Jim, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So a quick blur back on that, seeing how things are made. I was actually in a facility unrelated to dairy, but they actually make the base ingredient for all of these new poppable snacks. So you see these potato chips that are popped, or the veggie straws and stuff like that. We were at a facility that makes it's weird because it's almost like a plastic resin, but it's just this very small little puck that they make, and then they send it out to everyone else who pops it to make it a healthier snack instead of your normal like fried with oil, potato chip and stuff like that. So that was something really cool to see because I didn't even know it existed before until I saw it. So, you know, that's what's fun about getting into the facilities.
We know he's got a curious mind, but it's also full of good information. So Jim, we appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Yeah, thank you. So I will, there will be some overlap with Courtney's presentation, as you know, there's some things for boots that remain the same no matter the manufacturer. You'll see some information from Heartland, who is another boot manufacturer and does some manufacturing in the USA. But both kind of go back and forth between, I think, Tingley and Heartland boots being the most popular ones in the industry. So I will cover the different materials of rubber boots. Everyone calls them rubber boots, but today, I think in this presentation, you'll see 6 different materials. So there's no longer just one rubber boot out there. There's a lot of engineering and ingenuity going into different materials. And I'll jump into that. Protecting the toes, as Courtney talked about, and stopping the slip. Obviously, that's what we're here to kind of talk about, is how to prevent those slip, trips, and falls. And footwear can obviously be a huge part of that. So the PVC boots, those are your low-cost boots. They've been boots have been made out of PVC for years and years. Normally, I would say 3 years or more ago is companies would come to us and say, hey, we want the cheapest boot. What do you got? When you're cost conscious, you basically go straight down to PVC because that is where you could be in that $20 to $30 range for your boots. And as you'll see, as the materials kind of change, the price can jump up. I think the good thing for dairy processors is most of your employees can be, you know, year round, and you're not dealing with the seasonal. We deal with like the Seneca and Lakeside Foods up in Wisconsin, that their problem is they would love to get better boots that last longer, but then they get into a price point where it doesn't make sense for them to buy that for employees that are only going to be there for, you know, 3 to 4 months. So I think luckily for the dairy, you can have a better ROI on spending more on boots because your employees will be there longer and they'll get a, you know, full 6 months or year out of the boot versus being done for the season and they get, you know, tossed in the trash and you got to buy a brand new pair next year. So you could, from PVC, you can jump up to a nitrile enhanced option. This helps with chemical protection and it also increases durability. On the sole, it also helps with slip resistance as well. So there is a little bit of a notch up from the nitrile or to the nitrile enhanced PVC. There you get into, let's say, like a $30 or $40 range. The next kind of jump up from there is polyurethane. That holds up to a number of chemicals. Now you're getting into a different material that is lighter weight, more comfortable. It's still flexible, not quite as flexible as PVC, but it does have some nice self-insulating properties. So I'm sure a lot of the dairy and cheese manufacturers, you know, they have coolers, maybe some freezers, different things of that nature, where you're looking for a boot to help keep your feet warm in those environments. Natural rubber. This is the only one that is rubber, quote unquote, for the boots. That is probably seen by a lot of the facilities. That's your classic Tingley brick red boot. It holds up very well in the harsh environments. You know, great abrasion resistance, flexible materials. The natural rubbers are not manufactured in the US. So I think this just happened more during COVID, that the boots not manufactured in the US just took a long time to get in and stock up on things of that nature. Most of those issues have gone away, but obviously anything manufactured here in the States is going to be easier, more available to get. And if you really want to get crazy with stuff, you can start looking at changing colors and having them just for your company or facility. 2 new materials that have come into play are a thermoplastic elastomer TPE, which is a synthetic rubber It's very flexible, lightweight. As you see, it says lighter than the PVC and rubber materials, and it's made in the USA. So Heartland actually just won I forget the exact award, but there was an OSHA award for them for, I think it was 2023, because of the material and the sole that they put in for that one. That's only been out for a couple of years now, so people are just starting to get to touch and feel that material. And then EVA is the other really popular boot in the industry. The plain toe versions of an EVA boot are about 70% lighter than a PVC boot. And they say about for every pound taken off your footwear is like 5 pounds off your back. So there's huge ergonomics to gain for your employees who are spending, 8, 10, 12 hours a day on their feet. The EVA boots are just incredibly lightweight. When you touch them, it baffles people. So highly recommend taking a look at those. Both manufacturers have EVA options. The only bad thing about EVA is they are, like it says, very rigid. So if you're doing a lot of like bending down, kneeling, things of that nature, think more for probably your maintenance staff. That's where those boots aren't as comfortable and they start to wear and break down faster than the other materials. So definitely when you're looking at boots, know that they're not all rubber, they're not all PVC. There's a lot of different materials that are coming out that are lighter weight, more comfortable, more flexible. And we've had it over the last couple of years, a number of facilities just ranting and raving about how happy their employees are. They're more likely to do their job, jobs that they didn't want to do before. A new pair of boots has gotten them to do that job because it's been more comfortable for them in those areas and things of that nature. So outside of the OSHA and the slips, trips, and falls, just for comfortability and morale, boots can be an effective measure as well. Just really quickly, the steel and composite toes are the two that we typically see. Steel toes always been there, but I would like to kind of debunk the myth that steel toes are cold. I know for Heartland, they manufacture I got like a little piece here for their steel toe. They actually put the material on both sides of the steel toe. So they actually have like the Alaskan king crab guys and people like that purchase their boots with a steel toe, and they don't have complaints about their toes being cold because that steel toe is surrounded in the material. So kind of like to debunk that myth because we've had that come up a little bit. And then composite toe, you're seeing Tingley put a lot of composite toes in their boots. It does help make that safety toe a little bit lighter weight, but the black safety toe that I just kind of popped up to the camera is about 4 ounces added to your boot. So even that 4 ounces in the whole boot itself is very minimal with weight. So safety toes have come a long way. They're not as heavy and clunky as they used to be. Some of the manufacturers have different colors for whether it's a plain toe or steel toe. We don't run into this too much in the food industry because most people are saying, hey, we're going to do all safety toe or all plain toe. But if you do have different areas, we're using plain toe and safety toe. Plain toe can save you some money if you're really looking at it. And then they can be in different colors to help quickly identify if someone's in an area without a safety toe. For the slip resistance, as Courtney mentioned, that F3445 is 2021. It is newer. The minimum coefficient of friction is that 0.4. But there are some boots, for example, this one in the bottom left-hand corner, I think that's being rated at like a 1.2. So there can be a big difference based on sole materials and boots of what that's slip resistant rating is. Some are just getting it to the minimum, others are going above and beyond that 0.4. So for example, that one's 3 times the slip resistance just to meet the minimum with that. And the next slide, as Courtney kind of mentioned, I think evacuation is probably one of the most important things to look at when you're looking at the soles of the shoes. is, what's your materials on the floor? Do you have, or is it a liquid milk facility and there's just liquids? You can go with something that is the bottom left that has a tighter pattern, more contact, greater slip resistance, or do you have, curd on the floor and other materials that you need to evacuate from the boot, so that you're not slipping on that. That, you could have the most slip resistant boot in the world, but if you step on a pile of curd or something like that, you're going to go sliding. So you do, definitely look at the soles. That is a big part of it, and that will also go into how long that the boot's lasting for, as we kind of touched on. If you have any questions, this is kind of with boots, it's a kind of a difficult topic to cover via webinar, just because it's so much nicer when you can, pass samples back and forth and really feel the lightweight differences of the materials and the flexibility and stuff like that. But very easy to get samples sent out, and we encourage people to sample multiple materials and soles to really find what works best for you, because it's very plant specific. There's no one boot that does it all for everyone.
A great presentation, Jim. You fit so much in just 10 minutes. Very helpful to see the array of options, and to just get a little bit of a primer on what some of the pros and cons are for those things. So thank you so very much. We are going to transition now into the Q&A portion of our program. I want to thank all of our presenters for choosing to stay with us for this section of our program. Before I get to the pre-submitted questions, I'm going to give extra credit to Lonnie, who's on the line right now, because he is a Zoom pro, and he actually raised his virtual hand to ask a question earlier in the program. So Lonnie, this is your moment. If you'd like to ask that question now, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. First, thank you guys. It was really nice to listen to all this and understand what's out there. We run into a lot of this stuff. I'm from Ornua in Whitehall, Wisconsin. I don't know. I don't know if I know.
I'm a Western Wisconsin gal, Lonnie. I've been to Whitehall many a time.
I know, but I'm looking at Courtney too, because I deal with Nelson-Jameson too. And so.
Great.
So my question would start with Tony. If Tony's still on.
Yep, Tony's here.
All right, Tony. The floor style, we got multiple kinds here at our facilities. Has any question came up where the shoe wearing out on having a more grit than having the best grit to keep our employees safe?
Great question. And Tony, you'll need to unmute to answer, but the synopsis there is, you hearing any reports of people having their boots wear out faster because of more grit on the floor?
Well, I think it's probably going to happen. If the more non-skid that you do have, but again, it comes down to that safety issue. Do you want somebody falling, or do you want to get a new pair of boots every 6 months or a year or whatever it takes? I'm a safety guy, so from a standpoint of that, I'd rather be on the safe side than worrying about my boots wearing out. I think both Jim and Courtney really gave you a good idea of the different types of boots in combination with the floors. That's one of those questions to ask when you get involved with floors is, hey, these are the kind of boots that we have. Because I think it was Jim who mentioned the chemicals involved with some of his boots. Chemicals play a big factor from a standpoint of just, I've walked into plants and I've been in my leather soles or my shoes, and I can feel the acid coming through my shoes. Okay. Oh yeah. And so from that standpoint, maybe not in a food plant, but in other facilities. So the thing is that I think they're going to wear out, and you'd have to talk to them from a standpoint of which boot would be the longest wearing boot, I guess.
Oh, sorry, Lonnie, you're muted now. But I'll say also while you're unmuting, Tony, it sounds like a good opportunity to get a couple of your suppliers come visit you on the same day and to work out flooring and footwear issues all in one.
I didn't want to take up all of Tony said wanted to know if there was he said to ask questions. I threw it out there, but my biggest thing for the other two would be Jim and Courtney is the chemical and grip, water and chemical, thicker grip or fine grip. You showed me two different boots you guys did, and we use both of them. And then chemical seems to be our problem when you I know everybody's on here that does different stuff, but when we do our environmental and we do our cleaning and the chemical sits on there, if we don't rinse it, it gets slippery. We have found that a thicker grip boot has been better than a thinner than the thick. What have you guys seen out in the field? Or Jim and Courtney? A thicker grip
Great
or
question, Lonnie. Yep.
Yep.
So either one of you can unmute and answer that, or both.
So when you say thicker or thinner, are you talking about the tread pattern?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly right.
So, yep. So like a tighter, and I'm sure Courtney will say the same thing, not that I'm talking for her, but so with that Tingley Flight, that is the tighter version. So Tingley has two other soles. So they have the black boot or the black Flight that has a more like, evacuating sole. And then they also have a gray one with the orange, like wavy sole. That's really tight for liquids. I don't know if you've tried that one, but from what we've seen in the industry is whenever you're working with liquids, you can go with that tighter tread pattern, because you're going to get that's going to get evacuated out. The chemical in the water is going to get pushed out, and you're going to get more surface contact to the floor. Whereas if you had like the big tread that I was kind of highlighting for the one boot, that big tread, you're not going to fill up and evacuate that much liquid because there's just not that much there. And you're just going to have less contact to the floor with the boot sole because there's overall less. So I would say water, liquids, chemicals, that is the tighter tread pattern. Curd, meat, other things like that. That's where you want that bigger evacuation sole.
Well, thank you, Jim, and Courtney too. I'm sure you'll say the same thing. So thank you, guys.
Yep, he pretty much said everything.
All right, we're going to do a rapid fire round on some other Q&A that were pre-submitted or submitted just now via the chat. So we're going to go really quickly given the hour and time. Looking for, with this question, your number one piece of advice related to liability and preventing slips, trips, and falls. Quick thoughts on this from any of our presenters.
Well, if you're an owner and you haven't been sued, eventually you might be sued. So I'm a firm believer in safety, and the more I'd rather have a more non-skid floor than a less non-skid floor than have somebody fall. Okay.
Invest now as opposed to paying up later, right?
100%
You're gonna feel
correct.
better at the end of the day too, right? Any other thoughts, Jim or Courtney, or should I continue on? I know I've got two other questions in the queue.
Nope, that would be it. Just take all the reasonable, approaches to limiting that hazard, basically.
All right. Quick answer on this one. I think this is for Tony. Considering other flooring options, two big questions come to mind: cost and downtime. Can you share any insights on what folks might expect?
Well, I think in the industry, we're like anything in the flooring industry. It depends on how many square feet you got. Okay, if you got 2,000 square feet, you're going to pay, $10 to $12 a square foot. You may pay $8 to $10 a square foot, depending on the systems and depending on the top coats, depending on the time frame. There's a lot of factors that go into this. There are no matter what anybody tells you, there's no two floors alike because of all the parameters involved and everything that you're trying to achieve. So you have to, again, ask those right questions, the timing of things, what's the right product for the right environment, the chemicals, all this stuff comes into play. The time you're going to give me to get it done, is it going to be a weekend job? Is it going to be during the week? So there's a lot of, to give you a price and say, hey, listen, it's going to cost this amount. You can't do. But we could do if we had a sit down and we talked, and one of my contractors would come out and we would give you a hard budget, to deal with. Because a lot of you guys have to go get the money first before you do floors. Okay. You have to know what it's going to cost.
Yeah, it's a
So,
process for sure. So we will, so that's one-on-one question. I think that also during the course of the conversation here, we kind of touched on how long a boot will last. But Courtney, knowing that you haven't answered a Q&A very specifically yourself yet, I'll throw this to you. What's the range on the life of a boot? All brands, all styles. What's the shortest you've seen something last? What's the longest you've seen something last? I bet it's highly variable.
It is. That's a really hard question. I mean, we had an issue with customers and they redid their floors. Their boots lasted 2 weeks. They weren't using the right boot on the floor. So it's totally, varies by the environment that the boot is being worn in. I know it's not a good answer, but it's a hard question.
How about this? If you were advising a client on a boot, you'd be advising them on a boot that would last how long? How long should they try to get out of a boot? Knowing that people are different, their walk patterns are different. What's the advice you try to point them to?
I would say 5-6 months, something like that. I mean, that's kind of the range you want to get out of it. But again, so many variables go into that.
Sounds good. Think about how long your kids' shoes last. If it's less than 3 months, you're probably buying the wrong shoes, right, guys? All the moms and dads out there. Okay. These were great answers and great conversation. I love when it feels like the webinar needed to be 2 hours as opposed to 1. Want to just point you in the direction of some additional resources with our final seconds here. We do have an employee safety page on whizcheesemakers.org. And this does include an array of resources related to slips, trips, and falls. And you will find a recording of this webinar posted on that page as well here soon. I want you to know that we do have regulatory references from OSHA. We have information about how you can receive free consultative services about your facility and your practices and protocols. And specifically, we have some drill down information on combustible dust, emergency preparedness, hazardous energy control, hearing protection, and warehouse safety. Some of those are national emphasis programs right now with OSHA. We want you to know that we're offering trainings throughout the year. There's actually a basic safety training for dairy processors happening right now, and I will go to that after this webinar wraps. We have newcomers to the industry as well as some safety professionals in that class right now, covering all of the topics that are most important in a dairy processing facility. You can sign your valued staff up for those trainings in May, June, September, and October. Some of them are virtual, some of them are in person. We're trying to meet you where you're at and what works for you. We also offer a Train the Safety Trainer program, and our next offering there will be in December. It's a great opportunity for safety professionals to get together and learn together about the best adult learning styles and the ways that they can present information on a regular basis. You're also invited to join us for our health and safety group. This is an open and free committee. We will meet again in June and in October. Have some expert speakers. Typically OSHA comes in. We typically have WISCON or another consultative service sanctioned by OSHA, but separate of OSHA come in and give us information, as well as some of our trusted suppliers. And with that, I'll pass it back to Grace to talk about our next webinar offering. I think Grace is on mute right now.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to all of our presenters again for joining us today. Thanks to all of you for giving your time to learn more about this important topic. Next month, on May 14th, we will cover biosecurity strategies for dairy processors. You've undoubtedly heard about highly pathogenic avian influenza lately in U.S. dairy cattle. That obviously sparked a lot of questions for a lot of WCMA members. So we're happy to touch on this important topic in our next webinar in May. Registration for that webinar is open right now at wischeesemakers.org/events. So head over there and you'll find all the details you need to sign up, as well as some information on how you can submit questions for that webinar. Thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next month.